They were the perfect pair. Donny and Marie Osmond were not just brother and sister, they were a team the whole world loved. From their smiles to their music, everything about them felt joyful and full of energy. For many fans, they were more than just entertainers. They were like family. People grew up watching them, singing along to their songs and laughing at their playful banter on television. Their bond seemed unbreakable, something so strong that nothing could tear it apart. But behind the lights, behind the big stages and perfect images, something very different was going on. Something most people never saw. In the beginning, Donny and Marie had a magical connection. It was real, it was warm, and it showed every time they performed together. They were young when they started working in show business, and they leaned on each other to survive the pressure. They were not just performing, they were growing up in front of the world. That kind of life isn't easy. Fame can be heavy, especially when it comes at such a young age. But still they held on to each other, or at least that's what it looked like. People always said they had great chemistry. They finished each other's sentences, joked around like best friends, and seemed to always be in sync. But that kind of closeness doesn't always last forever, especially when two people are constantly in the spotlight. Fame can do strange things to people, even to families. It can bring them closer, but it can also push them apart. As the years went on, small cracks began to form. At first, no one noticed. Everything still looked perfect on the outside. But sometimes the signs are small, maybe a strange look, a missed performance, or a quiet moment that felt too quiet. Fans didn't think much of it at the time. After all, everyone has ups and downs, right? But for Donny and Marie, it wasn't just a bad day or a short disagreement. It was something deeper. Something more personal. What many people forget is that Donny and Marie weren't just working together. They were part of a huge, busy family, and they were also dealing with personal struggles. Marie had gone through heartbreaking moments in her life, including the tragic loss of her son. Donny too faced intense pressure to keep up with the perfect image the world expected from him. They were both trying to stay strong in public, even when they were hurting in private. And when people are in pain, even those closest to them can feel far away. Still common, no one expected that their strong bond could break. It just didn't seem possible. These were two people who had shared stages, dressing rooms, and decades of memories. They had each other's backs for so long. And yet something happened. Something no one saw coming, that changed everything. What could cause two people who had been through so much together to suddenly stop being close? That's the question that keeps people curious even today. There was no big public fight, no loud argument caught on camera. The separation between Donny and Marie happened slowly and quietly, which somehow made it feel even more painful. People wondered, was it business? Was it family pressure? Was it a mix of old hurt feelings that had been hidden for years? Many believe that something personal must have happened behind closed doors, something that touched a sensitive part of their relationship. Maybe it was jealousy. Maybe it was the feeling that one person wasn't being heard or respected anymore. Maybe it was a growing distance that neither of them knew how to fix. Whatever it was, it left a mark. And the sad part is, we may never know the full truth. What makes their story even more emotional is that it wasn't just a working relationship, it was family. When a friendship between co-workers breaks, it's painful. But when it's your own brother or sister, it hits in a completely different way. That's a kind of sadness that stays with you, even if you try to move on. Even if you smile for the cameras and keep working on your own, something feels missing. And fans felt it too. People started noticing the change. Marie began appearing alone at events. Donny did the same. Interviews no longer included both of them. When asked, they would avoid the question or give very short answers. The warmth and playfulness they once had seemed to disappear. And that silence, that uncomfortable gap between them, spoke louder than anything they could say. Their story is more than just entertainment drama. It's a reminder that even the strongest-looking relationships can be fragile. That sometimes even the people who look the happiest can be carrying pain that no one else sees. Donny and Marie Osmond gave so much joy to the world, but behind the joy, there may have been years of struggle, sacrifice, and sadness that finally caught up to them. And so, people still wonder, could they ever become close again? Is the door completely closed, or is there hope for healing? No one knows for sure, but one thing is clear, the end of their friendship wasn't just the end of a showbiz partnership, it was the loss of something beautiful, something rare. And for many fans, that loss still feels personal. At first, everything still looked the same. Donny and Marie were smiling on stage, making jokes, singing the songs that fans had loved for years. They stood side by side like always, dressed in bright clothes, with that familiar sparkle in their eyes. But something had changed. It wasn't loud, and it wasn't clear. It was quiet. So quiet, in fact, that most people didn't even notice it right away. But for the people who had followed them for decades, the change was there. It was in the little things. In the way they looked at each other. In the way they no longer finished each other's jokes. Something was off, and people were beginning to feel it. It started with small things. Maybe a moment on a talk show where they didn't seem as close, or a short pause before answering a question about their relationship. These were not big signs, but they felt strange. Fans who had grown up watching their close bond were surprised. It was like watching two best friends suddenly acting like distant co-workers. And when people asked questions, they didn't get answers. That made it even more mysterious. One moment that really caught people's attention happened during a live show. A small disagreement on stage that felt just a little too real. Donny made a joke that seemed to bother Marie. She smiled, but it wasn't the kind of smile people were used to seeing. It felt forced. The moment passed quickly, and they moved on with the show. But those watching closely could feel it. That wasn't just a joke. That was something deeper. Something personal. As time went on, those kinds of moments happened more often. They were still professional, still doing the job, but the warmth between them seemed to fade. Some fans thought maybe they were just tired. After all, they had been working for so many years, but others began to wonder if something was going wrong behind the scenes. They looked back at old videos and compared them to new ones. And the difference was hard to ignore. There was a certain kind of energy that Donny and Marie used to have. It was playful, natural, and full of love. Now that energy was missing. It was like a light had been turned off. They were still standing side by side, but there was a space between them that hadn't been there before. A quiet distance, and the more people noticed it, the more they began to ask what changed. Some fans believed it was stress. Performing live day after day is not easy. Being in the public eye can be exhausting. And for Donny and Marie, the pressure was even greater because they were expected to always get along. To always be happy. That's a heavy burden. No one can be perfect all the time. Maybe the stress had finally caught up with them. Others believed it was something more personal. Maybe an old argument that was never fully resolved. Maybe one of them felt hurt or unappreciated. Maybe they had different visions for their careers, or personal values that no longer matched. No one knew for sure, and the fact that neither of them spoke openly about it made people even more curious. There were also rumors in the media. Some said that business decisions were causing problems. Others said that personal family issues were coming between them. But none of these rumors were ever confirmed. And that made the silence feel even more powerful. Why weren't they talking about it? Why were they acting like everything was fine when it clearly wasn't? For a while, fans hoped things would go back to normal. Maybe it was just a rough patch. Maybe they just needed a break. But the signs kept growing. Marie started doing more solo interviews. Donny began taking on projects without her. Their once joint appearances became rare. And when they did show up together, they looked more like business partners than brother and sister. The sadness of it all was hard to ignore. These were two people who had shared so much together. Childhood memories, career highs and lows, family celebrations, personal heartbreaks. They had been through everything together. And now they were drifting apart, slowly, quietly, but clearly. And still the biggest question remained unanswered. Why? What made things change? Was it something said in anger? A feeling of being left behind? A difference that had been growing for years, but only recently reached the surface? No one knew, and Donny and Marie weren't giving any clues. They were polite in public. Respectful, but the warmth, the spark, that magic was gone. Even in their silence, fans could feel the pain. Because when people love a duo like Donny and Marie, they feel connected to their story. It's not just about the music or the shows. It's about the bond, the relationship, and when that starts to break, it feels personal to the people who followed them for so long. People began to wonder if the love between them was real, all along, or if it was just part of the performance. But deep down, most fans believed it was real. You can't fake that kind of connection for so many years, which made it even more heartbreaking to watch it fade. No one knows what really caused the change. But everyone could see it happening, piece by piece. And now all that's left are questions. What happened behind those closed doors? What was said in the quiet moments when no one else was around? Is there still hope for repair? Or is this just how their story ends? Whatever the answer is, one thing is certain: the bond that once made Donny and Marie Osmond so special is no longer the same. And for the fans who love them, that change still feels like a mystery waiting to be solved. Sometimes relationships don't end with a loud fight or a public argument. Sometimes they fall apart in silence, piece by piece, until one small moment becomes the final push. For Donny and Marie Osmond, that moment may have come without warning. One incident, one conversation, or even one misunderstanding might have changed everything between them, and the most interesting part is, the world still doesn't know exactly what it was. But those close to them say there was a turning point, something that made the quiet distance between them suddenly feel permanent. Imagine working side by side with someone for decades. You know their moods, their habits, their dreams. You share the stage, the spotlight, and the pressure that comes with it. Now imagine that slowly, without saying it out loud, you begin to feel something shift. Maybe you feel ignored. Maybe you feel tired of hiding your real feelings. Maybe you start to wonder if the other person truly understands you anymore. It doesn't take much to turn quiet frustration into something deeper. And according to people who were around them, during their final shows together, there was a moment that changed everything. It didn't happen in front of cameras. It wasn't a big fight that fans saw, but people who worked backstage said the mood changed after one specific disagreement. It was something small on the surface, possibly about a creative decision or a performance idea. Donny had one vision for the show. Marie had another. Normally these things were worked out easily, but not this time. This time the words exchanged behind the scenes were not friendly. They were sharp, personal. Some even say it brought up feelings and issues from the past that had never been fully resolved. What makes this moment so powerful is not just what was said, but how it made them feel. It's not uncommon for siblings to argue. It's not even rare for business partners to disagree. But this moment seemed to cut deeper. It felt like a break in trust. Like something that had been building up for years had finally reached the surface, and once it was out, it couldn't be taken back. Sometimes it only takes one moment of honesty, one raw emotion to break something that seemed unbreakable. After that incident, people noticed a change right away. Marie began spending more time alone backstage. Donny became more quiet, more focused on his solo work. The comfortable rhythm they once had was gone. When they came on stage, they still performed well. They were professionals, but the smiles didn't feel the same. The laughter didn't come as easily. Something was missing, and those who knew them best said it started with that one heated moment. Some believe the disagreement wasn't just about the show. They say it was about control. Donny had always been seen as the leader in many ways. He was older, more involved in the technical parts of their career. Marie, on the other hand, had grown stronger and more independent over the years. She had found her own voice, her own path. Maybe that made her want more say, more freedom. And maybe Donny wasn't ready for that change. It's possible that the argument touched on deeper feelings, things that had never been spoken out loud. There were also personal issues involved. Marie had been through emotional pain, including the tragic loss of her son. That kind of grief changes a person. It changes how they see the world, and how they deal with people around them. Donny too had carried the pressure of being a public figure for so long. Maybe both of them were simply exhausted. Tired of always being strong, always being perfect. And maybe that moment gave them a reason to stop pretending everything was okay. It's important to remember that Donny and Marie had spent most of their lives performing. They were in the spotlight since childhood. That means their entire relationship was built under pressure, cameras, and expectations. When you grow up in front of the world, it can be hard to know what's real and what's just part of the show. Maybe that one argument was so painful because it reminded them that they were more than just a brand. They were real people, with real feelings, and real wounds. After that moment, they never really returned to the way things used to be. Even when they stood next to each other, there was space between them. Not physical space, but emotional distance. Something unspoken, something heavy. They still showed up. They still performed. But the energy had shifted. Fans began to feel it, even if they couldn't explain it. That magical connection, the one that had made them famous, it wasn't there anymore. The strange thing is, neither Donny nor Marie has ever clearly talked about that moment. They've mentioned differences and changes, but never the full story. That silence has only made the mystery deeper. People are left to wonder what really happened. What was said that night? Was it anger? Was it hurt? Was it years of unspoken tension finally exploding? This mystery is what keeps people talking, because when something so strong falls apart, people want to understand why. It doesn't feel right to just let it fade without knowing the reason. And yet maybe the reason is something too personal to share. Something too painful to bring back into the light. That one moment, the triggering incident, was like the final crack in glass that had been under pressure for too long. The bond between Donny and Marie didn't break in a single second. But that moment might have been the one that made it impossible to fix. Even when the public doesn't see it, the pressure of fame can break a person. For Donny and Marie Osmond, it wasn't just about performing. It wasn't just about being in the spotlight. They were also dealing with their own personal struggles, ones that many fans had no idea about. When you're in the public eye for so long, it's easy to forget that you're still a person. You still have feelings. You still face difficult moments that others don't see. And for Donny and Marie, their personal pain began to show in ways that were hard to hide, even when they tried to keep it together. Marie had been through unimaginable grief. In 2007, she experienced the heart-wrenching loss of her son Michael. His tragic death from a suicide completely changed Marie's life. Grief is something that changes you in ways you can't always explain. It's a heavy burden to carry, and it doesn't go away quickly. But when you're a public figure, you're expected to keep going, to keep smiling, and to keep performing. And Marie did just that. She didn't just stop, she continued with her career. She continued working with Donny. But deep down, something inside her had shifted. The pain of losing a child is unlike anything else. It's the kind of sorrow that can make you look at the world differently. And while Marie kept performing, the hurt stayed with her. It affected her ability to connect with people, even the ones closest to her. For Donny, the pressure was also overwhelming in its own way. He had been in the spotlight for most of his life. The expectations placed on him were high, and sometimes it felt like he had to live up to a perfect image that wasn't real. People didn't see the struggles he faced in private. They didn't know that he too was going through his own personal battles. Donny had talked openly about his struggles with mental health, especially his battles with depression. Mental health struggles are not always visible to the outside world, but they are just as real as any physical illness. And when you're in the public eye, it's even harder to talk about. Donny kept these struggles to himself for a long time, and that pressure only added to the emotional distance between him and Marie. When you're dealing with something so personal, it's difficult to reach out to others, even to someone you've known your whole life. It's like being trapped inside your own mind, and it can make you feel isolated, even when you're surrounded by people. As the years went on, both Donny and Marie were carrying their own emotional weight, and while they continued to perform together, that weight started to take its toll. They were still siblings, but they were also people who were struggling to stay afloat in their own personal lives. It's hard to focus on a relationship with someone else when you're trying to keep your own life together. They had both been through so much, and it was starting to show. The happiness and energy they once had when performing together began to feel forced. It wasn't that they didn't care about each other. It was just that they were both dealing with pain that was too big to ignore. And the more they tried to keep going like everything was fine, the more the distance grew between them. The saddest part is that no one really knew what was going on. Fans saw the change, but they didn't understand why it was happening. They didn't know that Donny was struggling with depression, or that Marie was carrying the weight of such deep grief. They just saw two stars who had been so close suddenly becoming distant. They saw the smiles fading, the performances feeling a little less bright, and the love between them seeming less real. But behind all of that was a truth that no one could see, a truth that they weren't ready to talk about yet. And that silence only made the situation feel more mysterious. The more they tried to act like everything was okay, the more people started asking questions. When people are hurting, they often push others away, even when they don't mean to. Donny and Marie were no different. They were still performing, still going through the motions of their career, but emotionally they were both somewhere else. And because they didn't want to admit it, they didn't really talk about it with each other. The connection they once had was slowly slipping away, because they were both so focused on their own personal pain. And the worst part was that they didn't know how to fix it. They didn't know how to reach out to each other, when they were both hurting in different ways. They had always been able to rely on each other in the past, but now they were struggling to find a way back to the closeness they once shared. The truth is, it's hard to know how to help someone who is going through something so difficult. It's hard to know what to say when someone you love is in pain. Donny and Marie didn't know how to be there for each other in the way they needed. They didn't know how to support each other when they both felt broken in different ways. And that lack of communication and understanding made everything worse. Instead of coming together to help each other heal, they both withdrew, each dealing with their own personal battles. And that withdrawal made the distance between them feel even greater. Even as their personal lives were pulling them apart, they continued to work together. But the work became less about sharing joy, and more about just getting through it. The energy they once shared on stage, that magical chemistry that made them such a special pair, began to feel like a memory of the past. They were no longer the carefree duo that everyone had loved. They were two people, each facing their own struggles, unsure of how to reconnect. And the sadness in their performances was clear to those who watched closely. They were still there, but they weren't the same for their fans. It was heartbreaking to watch. They had grown up with Donny and Marie, feeling like they were part of their family. And now to see the distance between them, to see them struggling in silence, was painful. But even though their personal pain was evident, neither of them was ready to speak out about it. They kept it all hidden, trying to maintain the image they had built over the years. But behind that image was a truth that no one could ignore forever. As time passed, the distance between Donny and Marie Osmond seemed to grow even more. The performances, once full of energy and excitement, now felt strained. They were still doing their jobs, but the magic that had once made their partnership so special was gone. Fans could see it. They could feel it, but no one really knew why it was happening. It wasn't as if they had fallen out completely. They didn't have public arguments or make harsh statements about each other. Instead, they drifted apart quietly, like two people walking in opposite directions without saying a word. And this silent split left everyone wondering what was really going on between them. It wasn't just the performances that were affected, their personal interactions started to change as well. The way they spoke to each other, the way they looked at each other, it all started to feel different. Donny and Marie, who had once been so close, now felt like strangers. This wasn't the bond that fans had admired for so many years. Their relationship had always seemed so strong, so full of love and trust, but now there was an emotional wall between them that couldn't be ignored. It was as if they were both afraid to break down that wall and admit what had been happening. One thing that became clear over time was that both of them were struggling with their own personal challenges. Donny was dealing with his mental health issues, and Marie was still carrying the deep pain of losing her son. It's hard to focus on anyone else when you're consumed by your own emotional battles. It's hard to give your best to the people you love when you're just trying to get through the day yourself. And that's what Donny and Marie were both going through. They were so focused on surviving their own pain that they didn't know how to support each other the way they used to. Their once strong bond was being tested in ways they didn't know how to handle. But there was another part of the story that made things even more complicated. The public image that Donny and Marie had created over the years was a perfect one. They were the happy siblings, always together, always performing, always smiling. Fans loved them because they seemed so perfect. But the truth is, no one's life is perfect, and no one is immune to struggles. The pressure to live up to that perfect image was beginning to take a toll. Donny and Marie had always been open about the challenges they faced in their personal lives, but now it seemed like they were trying to keep everything under control. They didn't want the world to see the cracks in their relationship. They didn't want to admit that they were struggling. And that silence made things worse. As their relationship continued to change, Donny and Marie began to spend more time apart. It wasn't that they were angry with each other. It wasn't even that they didn't care. But the distance between them was growing and no one knew how to fix it. The more time they spent apart, the harder it became to reconnect. They had both become so used to keeping their pain to themselves that they didn't know how to share it with each other anymore. And as they continued to pull away, their fans started to notice. People who had followed them for years began to wonder if the bond that had once seemed unbreakable was really gone for good. It wasn't just their fans who noticed the change. People who worked with them also saw it. Backstage, things weren't as smooth as they used to be. Donny and Marie were still professionals, still putting on great shows, but there was a tension in the air. They didn't communicate as easily as they once had. They didn't laugh together the way they used to. Their energy was off and people around them began to feel the shift. The fun, light-hearted atmosphere that had once surrounded them seemed to be replaced with something much heavier. No one knew what had happened, but they could all feel it. Something was different. And that's where the real tragedy of the situation lies. Donny and Marie were still loved by their fans, still respected by their colleagues, but they had lost the connection that had made them so special. The bond they shared was no longer the same, and they didn't know how to get it back. They had always been so close, and now they were struggling to find a way back to each other. It's heartbreaking to watch two people who once meant so much to each other slowly drift apart, and for their fans it felt like losing something precious. There were moments, small moments, when it seemed like things might go back to normal. Donny and Marie would smile at each other, or share a laugh. For a brief moment it seemed like the old magic was still there. But those moments were becoming fewer and farther between. It was as if they both knew that the bond they had was slipping away, and no matter how hard they tried to hold on to it, it was slipping through their fingers. And the worst part was that they never really talked about it. They never publicly addressed the changes in their relationship. They never explained what had happened. Fans were left in the dark, unsure of what was going on. All they knew was that something had changed. Something had broken, but no one, not even Donny or Marie, was ready to say what it was. Maybe they thought that talking about it would make it worse. Maybe they thought that if they didn't acknowledge it, it would go away. But the truth is, when a relationship changes, ignoring it doesn't make it better. It only makes the distance grow wider. And as time went on, the silence became even more painful than the distance itself. Fans wanted answers. They wanted to know what had happened. They wanted to understand why two people who had seemed so close had become so distant. But as much as they wanted answers, Donny and Marie remained silent. They didn't give their fans the closure they were looking for. They didn't explain the pain or the heartbreak they were going through. Instead, they just kept performing. Just kept pretending that everything was fine. But everyone could see that it wasn't fine. And the more they pretended, the more they pushed their fans away. People didn't want to see two people who had once been so close pretending to be okay when they weren't. The truth is, Donny and Marie's relationship wasn't the only thing that had changed. The world around them had changed too. Their careers, their personal lives, and their priorities had all shifted. And it was hard for them to figure out how to adapt to that change. But instead of coming together to face it, they both retreated into their own worlds, unable to find a way back to the closeness they had once shared. The curiosity still lingers. What really happened between them? What caused this distance? Was it a single event, or was it something that had been building up for years? Will they ever speak about it openly? Fans can only wonder, but one thing is for sure: Donny and Marie Osmond will never be the same again. And that leaves the rest of us asking, what could have been? The relationship between Donny and Marie Osmond, once so strong and filled with love, seemed to be slipping further away, and no one seemed to know how to stop it. Fans who had followed their careers for years could see the change, but they were left in the dark about why it was happening. The mystery of what caused the distance between them became more and more intriguing. Was it something personal, something hidden, or was it just the natural consequence of being in the spotlight for so long? The more they tried to keep up the appearance of everything being fine, the more the tension grew. The public performances continued. The smiles were still there, but something was missing. And that gap between what was seen on stage and what was happening behind the scenes left people wondering just how deep the cracks really went. In public, Donny and Marie continued to work together. They put on great shows, and the audiences still loved them. But behind the scenes, it was clear that things were not the same. They were no longer the inseparable siblings who had laughed and joked together. The energy between them had changed, and people who were close to them began to sense that something wasn't right. Donny and Marie weren't showing the world the full picture. They were still doing their jobs, still going through the motions, but it was becoming more and more difficult to hide the distance between them. The more they tried to act like everything was okay, the more obvious it became that it wasn't. It wasn't that they were angry at each other, but something was off. They still shared the stage, but the magic they once had was gone. There was no denying it. They had spent so many years together, and their connection had once been something that fans admired. But now it seemed like that connection had been lost. They were still family, still colleagues, but they no longer had the same bond they once did. The question everyone was asking was why? Why had things changed so drastically between them? What happened to the closeness they once shared? Was it something that happened suddenly, or was it a slow drift that had been building up for years? Fans were curious, and so were those closest to them. Was there a single event or disagreement that caused this shift, or was it just the result of living in the spotlight for so long? The pressure of fame can be overwhelming. And for Donny and Marie, it seemed like the weight of that pressure was starting to take a toll on their relationship. Being in the public eye for so long can make it hard to be real with the people you care about. The expectations are high, and the scrutiny is constant. It's easy to forget that you're still a person with real emotions, real struggles, and real pain. Donny and Marie had spent decades performing for their fans, but it was clear that they were both struggling with personal battles that were affecting their relationship. Marie had been through unimaginable pain, losing her son Michael in a tragic way. Grief like that doesn't just go away. It changes you. It makes you look at the world differently. And while Marie had kept going with her career, the weight of her grief was always with her. It wasn't something that could be easily shared, especially with someone who was going through their own struggles. Donny too had been dealing with his own battles. He had talked openly about his struggles with depression and the toll it had taken on him. Mental health issues are invisible to the outside world, but they are real, and they can create a distance between you and the people around you. Donny and Marie were both going through things that were affecting them in different ways, and that made it difficult for them to support each other in the way they once did. But the real mystery was not just about their personal struggles, it was also about their inability to communicate with each other. They had always been close, always able to share their feelings and talk things through. But now it seemed like they were both struggling in silence, unsure of how to reach out to each other. It was as if the things they were going through were too heavy to talk about, and the silence between them grew. They didn't know how to break through that silence, and the more they tried to act like everything was fine, the more the distance between them grew. The fans noticed this. Of course, they weren't blind to the change. They had watched Donny and Marie grow up on stage, and now they could see the tension in their performances. The smiles weren't as genuine, the energy wasn't as high, and the chemistry that had once made them such a great duo was no longer there. Fans began to wonder what had happened. They loved Donny and Marie, and they wanted to know what was going on, but Donny and Marie remained silent. They didn't explain what had happened between them. They didn't share the truth with their fans. Instead, they continued with their performances, as if nothing had changed, but everyone could feel the difference. In a way, the silence made it worse. Fans were left to fill in the blanks, and that only made the situation more mysterious. What was really happening between Donny and Marie? Why were they so distant? Had something happened that caused the rift, or had it just been building up over time? Fans had so many questions, but no answers. And that curiosity only added to the sense of sadness surrounding their relationship. It was as if everyone was waiting for Donny and Marie to open up, to tell their side of the story, but they never did. It was heartbreaking to watch, especially for those who had followed them for so long. They had been so close, so inseparable for years, and now it seemed like that bond was lost. But even though they had drifted apart, they didn't give up on each other completely. They still worked together, still performed together, but it was clear that something had changed. The connection they once shared had been broken, and it seemed like neither of them knew how to fix it. The more they tried to act like everything was fine, the more it became clear that it wasn't. The curiosity about what had really happened between them lingered for years. Fans wanted answers, but Donny and Marie never gave them. They remained silent, allowing the mystery to grow. And in the end, that silence became just as much a part of their story as their performances and their time together. The distance between them became one of the biggest mysteries of their careers.